Well, that's a comfort to me to hear that sound because, that means it's another week at the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm Jim Reed, which means you are listening to the Forums edition. And as every week, I'm joined by an illustrious panel of Rec Poker members, the core team, and a special guest this week. So I'll just introduce myself. Like I said, I'm Jim Reed, Bluffsterini in the home game, at Jim in the Forums. And Chris Jones, you are next.
Yeah, I'm Chris Jones. I'm 5x5 on both PokerStars and Twitter. And I think the forums as well.
I'm John Somsky, and I'm Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And I'm Rob Washam. I'm Rabman50 everywhere.
And for the first time, we've got, I was going to say three-dimensional John Somsky, but it's not, it's still two-dimensional, but we feel like you've really upgraded that. We've got the webcam here. We're dealing with the VIP, the celebrity himself, the one and only John Somsky. Thanks for joining us live and in person. Speaking of live and in person, I'd like to welcome Eric, or Com Binkley, as he's known. Binkley, as he's known. He's a man of many names and many hats. Welcome to the podcast, Eric.
Thank you. This is Eric Jin. I am Binkley on the Rec.Poker forums and COM Binkley in the home games.
Eric's been posting up a storm in the forum, and we decided we had to have him on to talk about a post and get some of these great thoughts about poker. Eric's also one of the regulars in our OPA Invitational on Tuesday nights and has brought home a couple victories in that series, if memory serves. So I'm looking forward to this. So Eric, you posted a hand in the forums, a series of hands, where you have strong hands in the blinds and you're facing pre-flop raises and re-raises. So people always talk about these as though they're easy decisions, but I think you've picked good hands to talk about here, where you're in that spot where I don't think it is that easy a decision. So why don't you talk us through what made you post these hands and we can get into it.
Yeah, so I was playing online, playing on Ignition. And those who aren't familiar with that, Ignition is an anonymous site. So you don't have player names, they're just anonymous. So it's hard to get a read on, you really don't get reads on people or history or HUDs of that sort. And especially I was playing a fast fold cash game. So you have the option to immediately fold and they move you to another table with other people.
So every hand, you're actually dealing with a completely anonymous table. You don't even have the previous hand's action to go on.
Correct.
Oh, I'm getting hives just thinking
about it.
Oh, God, that's not the kind of poker I want to play. All right, cool. I'm with you.
It's less exploitative strategy and more of that, GTO game theory type strategy.
Cool.
So you get a lot of hands, and I had a session where kind of similar situations came up and kind of close together, and that's why it stood out to me. So in the first hand, I'm in the small blind with queens, pocket queens, really good hand. But then I had the action of it's 6 max, so the low jack, first act, actually goes a standard 3 big blind raise, and then the hijack 3-bets him. And it comes around to me. So, that was the first hand that stood out to me. And then shortly after that, I had another hand where I was faced with a similar decision. This time I had pocket queens again, but this time I was in the big blind. Low jack, first act, did a standard 3 big blind raise. Hijack, 3-bet him, 3 times his. And then the cutoff, which unlike all the other players were playing about 100 big blinds deep, this player was about 50 big blinds deep. Well, they shoved all in. Button folded, small blind folded, and then it was up to me. So that was another hand. And then the final hand I had was this time I was in small blind. I had ace queen suited. This time under the gun, low jack folded. The hijack raised. The cutoff just flat called, and then the button 3-bet him. and then I was next to act.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it stood out just because here, you queens, ace queen suited, those are good hands that, I would happily 3-bet, but when it came out to me, it wasn't a matter of 3-betting. It was a matter of, do I want to 4-bet or call a 3-bet or call a 4-bet? So, yeah, and it was just interesting. It was, during during the same session that all this happened, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
what's going on here?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
getting punished by difficult decisions with good cards,
Yeah.
right? That's a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So my initial thought was like, if I had jacks, I'd throw them in the muck, just, without a second thought. Aces or kings, I'd put in the, 4-bet, 5-bet, whatever, without a second thought. But the queens just felt it was right on that cuspy, like, is this strong enough to, raise? And calling, given that much action, not closing the action, calling didn't feel good either. So that's why I posted it.
So it's interesting because the first two hands, you've got queens in the blinds in both of them. And they both have a raise and a 3-bet, and the sizing's a little different. But other than that, they seem sort of similar. And one thing that's interesting about these anonymous tables is that I think you really have to think about, instead of playing against individuals, you have to think about playing against the tendencies of player pools and how they tend to react in the big picture generally, which you were referring to before. So I think it's the sizing might actually influence the action a bit if you think that it's, as a tendency of the player pool, skews them towards a stronger part of their range or a weaker part of their range. But yeah, I'm with you. Especially if you're going to be out of position, calling doesn't seem like a great position to put yourself into. Investing a lot of big blinds are you set mining with queens at that point? Out of position, that seems like a hard way to play it. But 4-betting also seems, especially that cold 4-bet like that, feels like you're only going to get called by the hands that you really don't want to see, with this kind of stack depth as well. And I know that might differ slightly in tournaments, but the only hand you really want to see is ace king, and you're not loving life getting it in against that either. So I don't know if that might have some difference between tournaments and cash as well, but yeah, it is a tricky spot. Does anyone have, what are you guys thinking about as factors when you're considering you're out of position, you've got this fairly premium hand, but the action's telling you you're up against a pretty tight range? What's going through your head when you're in that spot?
I think I want to know where I'm at before I get involved too much. A call is you're turning your queens into a set mining opportunity, right? Because by calling, you're saying, well, he must have aces or kings, ace, king maybe at the worst. So I think I would probably want to raise this both times that I had queens. I'd probably want to raise it and just, you could probably raise and fold to a 4-bet all in. Actually, you would be 4-betting, so it'd be a 5-bet. So I guess you could fold to a 5-bet, because that has to be a lot of strength, especially with the player pool on the ignition site. So I think I'd want to know where I'm at before I got too much farther in hand, and I think I'd raise it to, 3 times whatever that initial bet was, maybe $9, $10, something like that. I know it's a big chunkier stack, but I think you can still get away from it if you do get 5-bet.
And I misspoke there for the record. Sorry. In the first hand, it was a raise and a re-raise. In the second hand, it was a raise, a re-raise, and then a shorter stack shoving on top. So of course that does change the dynamic. So yeah, Rob, you're talking about in the first hand there, getting that 4-bet in and acting appropriately afterwards. Yep,
right.
That makes sense. And that was the hand where the 3-bet was a little bigger than you might see typical. 3 times the opening raise would be to $2.25, and this player put it to $2.60. So
but also, yeah, I think in cash games, I don't think the rules are not really the same as you see in tournaments.
That's a good point.
You do see a lot bigger openings, I
Yep.
think a 3x open is probably small.
That's
It
a good
could be
point.
small in a lot of cash games.
Online, it's about typical, and in this game. So yeah, live, a cash game, 3x would be a smaller, in live cash, 4x, 5x is more typical, but
Right,
online,
right.
I will say that three bet that you saw was a 260 or 265.
Yeah.
There's actually, that isn't unusual for this game because there's actually a pot button
Oh,
that, and if
right.
you press that, that's the size because it takes into account the small blind and
Was this a fast fold game
yes, it
or?
is.
Okay,
Yes,
so
it is.
that makes it even more difficult, or you have to go more by the player pool because you don't even know who this player is. You may have played
Yes.
with them, but they aren't going to be in the same seat. You aren't going to have played multiple hands. Whereas if you play in a normal anonymous table, you can get a feel for how a player plays. You just have to watch really closely to see, is this number 6 a different number 6 than you were playing 3 minutes ago or whatever. But I think I tend to agree with basically what Rob says. I have not played for a while on Ignition, so I don't know what the right play against the player pool would be. But my first inclination would be to raise with both of them, and with hand number 2, the where you had the shover in front of you, I just shove all in. That way, you're going to realize whatever equity you have in the hand, guaranteed. And I think queens are strong enough hand to do that. And most likely, you're going to go heads up against the all-in player. And if you don't, you're probably not in that bad of shape.
Yeah, I when I look at I want to talk about hand number 3 because I think that's the one that I think is the potentially the most interesting. But with these first two, when we've got queens, I think that hand number 1 is sort of clearly when we've got just an open and a 3-bet. I think we've got a pretty clear, especially in a cash game, we've got a pretty clear 4-bet and a potential 4-bet fold. But it's one that I think we have to sort of because that 3-bet range can be pretty wide. And depending on the player, but I think once we start seeing 4-bet all-ins, that is rarer, even with a short stay. Now, when somebody's got only $12 in it looks like most of the tables coming with is it pretty typical to start with 100 big blinds, that kind of $25 stack?
Yeah.
Okay.
Most people do. Actually, I do. What I do is I look at people's stacks, and if it's close to 25, then I figure either A, they just joined the game, so it's hard to tell what's going on, or B, they're more aware that they will top off, right?
Right,
So
right.
if I see a shorter stack like that, then I usually suspect that maybe they're a weaker player that isn't cognizant and aware and doesn't top off when he gets
Yeah, it doesn't
slower.
top off, and also may have just, the other thing I notice when I see a stack like that in a cash game is that that's a player that may have just sort of recently lost half their stack.
Right.
And you can't know that for sure. They could have just started short, but you usually don't start with 1269. So it seems like that could be going on. So that this is a tougher hand for me, like in terms of what we do. But I think I would be leaning between shove or fold. I think those are our only two options. I think calling this is a mistake. So, but those are my thoughts, and I think it would be really dependent on thing. I think I'm shoving more than I'm folding, but I could find a fold in this spot.
Yeah, I definitely, when I was playing more cash online, I had a colored tag for those players with the shorter stacks, and there was a real polarity there because they were either recreational players that were just not very stack savvy and were kind of caught between, maybe they bought in for the minimum of 50 big blinds or 40 or 50 big blinds, and then they were just sort of like wherever they were, or maybe they bought in big and just, as you say, they didn't have the top up betting set. But the other group that's in that is the ones that are always at exactly 40 or 50 big blinds, and who are, the short stack ninjas who are just playing a completely different game. They're never set mining, they're only ever playing aggressively. And so I would have a different color that I would tag them with. So I know that wouldn't really matter here in the anonymous tables. But if you're playing online and you're playing against cash tables, if you're playing on cash tables and you are able to tag players, tag the ones that have these weird amounts. They're typically not paying too much attention. And if they always have like right on the limit, that might just mean that they're short stack players. That's something to think about as well. So then, and I'm with you, Chris. I think on the second hand, it's a shove. I think you're going to get ahead. You're going to get heads up with that button a lot. They're going to have a lot of hands where they've got one overcard and one undercard to your queens. And when they don't, sometimes you're ahead, sometimes you're behind. That's poker. It's hard. And then, yeah, I'm with you on the third one, because ace queen suited is another one of those hands that in some cases you'd love to be driving the action and getting it in. And in other hands, sometimes it feels like you're drawing dead. So just to review the action for that one. So the low jack folds, hijack raises 3x, cutoff calls, and the button raises to 3, which all seems pretty standard. So and I think the button taking the squeeze spot there makes me more inclined to 4-bet this, to be honest with you, even though it's a nice, pretty hand to play suited. Out of position is not that nice, and in a 3-bet pot, it still has one of those hands. It's got those. It's almost a really good hand, And so I'd rather be playing it against a range that's calling my action than that a range that is completely uncapped and I've called the action, because I think that's just going to make it, even though I still am going to be behind, I might make a less expensive mistake by putting it in that 4-betting range now. That's what my gut says. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I could see a 4-bet there, but at the same time, you'd like to be able to see a flop multi-way with the ace queens. If the hijack and the cutoff both call, ace queen suited is a pretty nice hand to have in a multi-way pot. Ace queen off, you could easily 4-bet and then fold to a 5-bet.
Yeah.
And at least then you're defining their range, which you're not doing by calling. You're that button range is wide open if you just call. Now, if you 4-bet and they 5-bet, well, then they've defined their range pretty clearly at that point. So that's kind of a couple of thoughts I would have going into it. Not sure what I'd actually do there. I might just call with the ace queen suited and take a flop and see what happens.
We're also really deep, or deeper than we've been. Like everybody here, we're the effective stack, and we have $32. So everybody's sort of chipped up here, which actually leans me more towards that call than the 4-bet here. Even though buttons range can be, I think, pretty wide. I mean, we can assume that buttons squeezing a decent amount here once they get that flat. I don't mind going to a flop multi-way against a range like that with this particular hand. Like it flops well, and when it doesn't, I don't need to invest a lot with it. So this is an interesting spot, because I think you can definitely 4-bet. But I this is probably a spot where I'm leaning more towards a flat.
And when you do, how do you feel about a 1-pair hand? Like, how much of, okay, I guess my question is, how much of your inclination to call has to do with the fact that you can make the nut high flush? Because the depth of the stack makes me more inclined to play with those nutted hands. And I'd feel the same way about a set, right?
Yep.
Where you'd still like to be in position, but at least if someone makes a mistake, it's going to be an even bigger mistake because the stacks are deep. So is that part of it, or is it just that it's often going to be a high pair and a high kicker? And
I mean, you know, if this flop comes queen 7-5 or something after I flat, and let's say the hijack comes along as well, maybe they all come along. We go four way, and it comes queen 7-5 rainbow. Um, I'm feeling pretty decent about
Mhm.
my hand still. Like I think I've got the best hand there a lot of the time. There are probably some sets of five, sets of sevens that are kind of showing up. There's obviously millions of flops where
Sure.
queen is the high top pair, but um, if it's queen, I mean, I think it really depends on what my top pair is. If it's queen jack 9, I'm feeling a lot worse. Um, you know,
Well, and wouldn't you
Right.
feel a little worse if it came ace high as well?
yes,
Because, an ace king is a good candidate for something that would be out there.
yeah, for sure, for sure. An ace would be a really tricky spot, and I think with any top pair here, I am not excited to take the lead, and I'm probably in a lot of check call sort of
Yeah.
type situations, especially multi-way.
Well, so if you're going to three bet, what are you going to three bet to?
I'm probably three betting
Oh, four bet,
to,
I guess,
or four
in the ace
betting
king.
Yeah,
Yeah.
four
to.
betting.
Yeah.
Four betting.
I'm probably from the small blind. I'm going 1250, I think.
So once you go 1250, that is
Yeah, it's a lot of
a
your
third of your stack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think from a stack to pot ratio, that makes this hand really difficult to play.
Hmm.
I mean, it would be easier to play moving all in, but it seems like that's just too many chips to put in with ace queen. Now the advantage of going all in, of course, would be then your position is no longer a disadvantage for you because you're in the absolutely worst position. But because of the size of the stacks and because of being out of position, I kind of think I'd lean towards just a call. Once you
Mhm.
call, though, you have to realize odds are you're going to be playing a four-way pot.
Right.
Yeah, you're giving great odds to the other guys to come along.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's what you want too, because you have the kind of hand that you want those implied odds that you're going to get by, having more dead money in the middle.
So
Yeah,
if you do
go ahead.
flat and the original raiser, then four bets.
Ooh.
I'm out.
Okay.
Yep. I agree.
I'm flatting with the intention of seeing a flop at this point. And if there's any more action, my hand is no good anymore. Or maybe I'm up against jacks or tens or something like that, but I'm okay giving it up.
Yep.
So
I agree.
what if the original raiser four bets and then it goes call?
Yeah, now you're back in that.
And now you're closing the action with the call.
You're getting really good odds now.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. That's a real question. That's a good question, Eric. I don't know. I mean, it's very tempting. You're not.
Yeah, boy.
I mean, you're not really.
It would just depend on the size of the four bet, right?
I think it would a little.
You
I
got to
think-
figure the four bet's going to be right in that $12 range, like John
Well,
was
because
talking
you're
about.
also in the pot, right? So there's even more in there for him to be leveraging. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, ace queen. This is a garbage hand. Why does anyone play this?
It's suited.
So let me roll through a couple of comments we got in the forum post itself. So Jamel, who's one of our great forum stars here, says that
Also a cash game guy.
a cash game guy. Yeah, good point. So one says Jamel doesn't want to call there, playing out of position with pocket queens, and so he advises raising up to $9, putting the pressure on the original raiser, leverage and fold equity. Yep. And getting it in on flops that don't have an ace or a king, which, yeah. Now, I'm always these spots where you're getting it in on flops that don't have an ace and a king. The problem with that is that you're letting the guys that had ace king off the hook when they get into the hand and see that flop. if you're, which just comes down to how do you want to play queens versus ace king, or how do you think other people are playing ace king? If you're in a pool where other people are not using ace king aggressively all the time, that really does change how you have to play some of those flops when you have a hand like queens or jacks or something like that, because you're always going to be losing to kings and aces. The question is, if they're going to play ace king aggressively, like, are you going to get the money before they know they have an ace or a king on the board, or after they know they have an ace or a king on the board? So that's something to think about there. For hand two, Jamel says that the hijack being pretty deep concerns them. And with two left to act, he says a nitty fold and find a better spot, just because the players still to act have uncapped range, or at least one of them has an uncapped range, and they're pretty deep. And yeah, I can't argue with that. You're not gonna catch up very often if you've got pocket queens and you're behind. Let me put it that way. And hand three recognizes that the button is taking a good squeeze spot, and just wishes that we could have taken it because our hand isn't really good enough to continue with it from there. So yeah, I hear that. So he says to call in position. And when you guys are talking about the stack size, that is such a relevant factor. You can get pot committed so quickly, and ace queen suited, out of position. It's yeah. So what are some other good candidates then, if we're in this spot, to have in that four betting range? If ace queen suited is too good and you want to call and see a flop, is it like Rob said that you should just be four betting hands like ace queen offsuit and getting away from them? Can you ever get away from a hand when you're four betting to a third of your stack? Is that even a good idea in a cash game or something? Because I think it makes sense to have a raising range here that's not just aces and kings. And so what are the good hands to add to that we don't want to call with?
I think part of it it is different because it's a cash game. I'm not convinced that you have to have a four betting range here. From the small blind when you're deep. I mean, the deeper play gets, the more conservative action tends to be, because you need to protect your stack until you know more information, and the only information you're going to get is the cards coming out on the board. So I don't know if you need to have much of a four betting range.
Yeah, that's a good point.
From the small blind,
especially at this stack depth, because
right.
Because you can't. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. So ARW, one of our other forum posters, does a great breakdown in here. I'm not going to go through it all because ARW does these great posts. They're so dense. He goes through a bunch of combo talk. He breaks it all down. I really, if you go to rec.poker, go to the forums and look for the cute little dog. That's ARW's avatar, and you'll find some fun posts in there. But the long and short of it is, on the first hand, he calls with the queen. Oh no, is that he's referencing a raising seems best and yet risky. So I'm with you on that one, ARW. And in the hand three with ace queen suited, he does say four betting to 8 or 9, or about a quarter of your stack. So that's a smaller four bet than we had talked about, which you can make your four bets smaller to the three bets than you can three bets relative to opens. You don't have to make your four bets as big relative to the three bet as you do three bets to open. So that's something. Being out of position, I always want to size up a bit, because I just don't want to give that player any extra reason to call and get in position against me. So ARW says three betting to $8 or $9 is about a quarter of your stack, which means that you're not committed to the pot. And if you four bet larger, you'll increase your fold equity, but you also invest a bigger piece of your next bet, which is right. And I think, especially with a hand like ace queen suited, if you are going to four bet, if you are going to have it in a four bet range, you want it to be in one that you can get away from it to the five bet, because at the fields we're playing against, I don't think people are shoving five bets wide enough, in a polarized enough fashion. And I think what Chris said just before is really good too. even if they do show up with that hand that you're beating, it's just one of the hands that they're doing that with. And so even if you can say to yourself, oh, you could do, you know, I've got ace queen, he could do this with jacks, he could do this with ace jack or something like that. That's true, but that's still only a part of the range that they're doing with. And most of the range is still up here, the ones that are crushing ace queen. So sometimes you just have to know that you could be wrong about it and still make the decision that is right most of the time. It feels like that would be, I don't know. Poker's hard.
Yeah.
We got two more quick comments in here. I'm a Luigi says, responding to hand number 3 because it's most interesting. The overcall caps the caller's range, which makes a 3-bet squeeze wider, which is absolutely correct. And yeah, I'm a Luigi also feels like playing out of position is hard, and it might be hard to play even ace queen suited profitably in that way. And so they like to 4-bet as well, I guess, to a smaller sizing. And actually, they don't mind calling it off in a low stakes cash game if they have a history on the villain. So we don't have history on the villain here too. All right, and then Binkley comes in and provides some closing knowledge about. So yes, you get to go on and get the hand history information later. Is that right, Binkley?
Yeah, so Ignition, after 24 hours, you can download your hand history, which shows you all the hands of everybody on the table. So
Whether
that's
they
what I
went to
do.
showdown or not, right? So you actually,
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
so that's cool. That's cool.
Yes.
So we don't get that. I don't get that on my HUD playing like with my poker tracker playing on ACR or poker tracker 4. I get the hands they showed down with in real time. So this is interesting because what they want you to do is they want you to have the integrity of the game not being questioned so that you can see all the hands.
Yes.
And you can also, if you get enough of that data, you can start making some educated guesses about the playing field, the player field as well.
Yeah,
because you actually get to see that.
Yeah, that's something I need to do, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine that study would be very rewarding, having that access. So now again, you never get to actually relate it to any individual player. So it's a nice balance they've struck.
Yeah, you'll get an aggregate, right, of what people are opening, what people are 3-betting, you know. So I do have the results.
Yeah, so take us through it.
Okay, so hand number 1, again, that's where I had queens in the small blind, facing the low jack, open, hijack, 3-bet. In game, I folded. So yeah, based on the conversations, if I had to do differently, I think a 4-bet and then fold to a 5-bet would have been the better action. But in game, I thought, you know, I had really just a small blind invested, so I did the nitty fold. So it turns out low jack had opened with ace jack offsuit. Hijack had 3-bet with queen 9 suited. So I had him crushed. So.
Yep. You know that you would have seen that ace. You would have seen that ace as soon as you got it in. Good
Yeah,
deck
but some of those hands might not even be there.
Yeah, that's
right.
right.
Yeah.
Good
If
point.
I 4-bet the low jack, you know, he'd likely be out of there. Okay, so
low jack probably folds that ace jack because he doesn't know that the button's got queen 9. So yep, good call.
Okay, so hand number 2, again, that's where low jack open and then hijack 3-bet and then cut off, shoved with about 50 big blind stack. Again, I went nitty and folded. Low jack had opened with king 3 suited. Hijack 3-bet him with jack 10 suited, and the cutoff shoved his 50 big blinds with ace king off. So again, my queens were ahead of all 3 ranges.
And the cutoff lost a couple of lost one of his outs with the low jack hand.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
That's true.
But you got to think when there's 3 players in there like that there's going to be a lot of overlap in the kind of hands that they have. So a lot of your outs and their outs are probably intermixed amongst all of that. So.
And I find a lot, depending on the action, depending on the position, those tend to be a lot of like unpaired aces and kings. And so if I'm in your spot holding ace king, I'm actually even less inclined to get involved because I'm sharing outs. Even like the hands that I have dominated, that's
Mhm.
great that I've got them dominated. But if there's 4 players in the hand, one of them's got pocket tens, and none of us are going to hit our aces or kings because we're sharing them. And
Right.
so I'm more inclined to get it in these multi-way spots like that, where you feel like the rest of the group's like almost already committed. I'm much more inclined to do it with a bigger pair than with ace king or ace king, ace queen, even though you don't get, it's like I said before, you can't catch up as easily, but you're just not blocking as many of your outs
Mhm.
that way. And then hand 3, how did it go? This is
And
the
3,
exciting
the one that people said was most interesting. So in game, my thoughts were the hijack open and cutoff call. It looked like a really good squeeze spot for the button. So I decided to 4-bet. I went just 2.25x of the 3-bet. So I went $6.75. Hijack and cutoff folded. The button called. The flop came 10 of spades, queen of hearts, 5 of clubs. I c-bet to $6 and the button folded.
Hmm.
Button had ace, jack of diamonds. And it turns out the hijack, the original raiser, had pocket 4s, and the cutoff had, the 3-better had pocket jacks.
Oh, interesting. So it's too bad we couldn't get it in. Oh, actually, no. This is the ace queen hand, right? So actually, pretty gin flop, really, given what we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier.
Yep.
And yeah, well, yeah, I guess the jacks player was equally disciplined, eh? Just didn't want to get any further with that action.
Well,
Next.
jacks. He was facing a 4-bet,
Right.
a cold
Right.
4-bet. So
Yeah. In the muck.
And actually, I kind of like your bet sizing preserved your stacked pot ratio. So it gave you a little bit more playability and room to get away from the hand even easier after the flop, and yet still got you heads up.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
very surprised that the one thing I don't like about the sizing, but it worked out for you in this situation. I am shocked that the jacks didn't come along for that price. That I think that's a mistake from those jacks. To be honest, even though it's a 4-bet, it's a smaller 4-bet, and I think that you almost have to just take your jacks and see what turns up on a
Were they the
flop.
ones? Were they the ones that had called the open and gotten squeezed?
Yeah,
Yep.
yes.
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
So they were playing it a little bit snug to
Yep.
begin with.
Yep.
So it's interesting again to wonder what if the cutoff had 3-bet, which would be more typical.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now the button, what's he doing with ace jack suited?
You might
Mhm.
just call there.
All right.
Right.
Which changes the amount in the pot, which might affect your action. Now they're more
Right.
committed by the
Mhm.
time it comes around. It's funny how these little things affect the action, especially in these multi-way pots. Chris was just leading us on a seminar about this, and it really does change the action. How people have played earlier in the hand, not only according to pot geometry, but ranges too. Cool. Well, is there anything else people want to mention about this or about? Well, one thing I'll tell you is by the time you hear this, we're probably running the course over at rec.poker, where we're going to be getting together once a month with premium members to study and get together and talk about poker. The main topic is pre-flop ranges, their construction and application. So that'll include opening ranges, calling ranges, 3-betting, and then some of these interesting spots. 4-betting and 5-betting ranges, I find, are something that are so interestingly suitable to certain players and certain player pools that I think we'll have a lot of interesting discussions similar to tonight. So without any further ado, let me see if I can cue up the appropriate music. I'll thank our sponsors. Oh no, for the first time tonight. Well, this time I mean it twice. So our good friends at website AMP, Running Aces, Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and Learn Pro Poker. Thanks, Eric, for joining us. Thanks, Rob, Chris, and John. And just for chatting poker like we always do. See you next week.